So I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners to order for Tuesday, February 6, 2018. And the first item of business is adjustments to the agenda. And I have one adjustment I would like to make to the agenda because I think it would be pertinent to handle this while there's some of the folks that are here for public comment to hear the discussion. And that I would like to move agenda team request up item 8B to right before public comments. I also want to remind folks we have a 10:30 time certain item and a 1:30 time certain executive session today. Any other adjustments to the agenda? If not, then we'll move on to item 8B, which is agenda team requests and future agenda items from the board and work session request. And last week we had a significant discussion under this item about holding a work session on the initiative process, and we were looking at March 13th for that date. And in agenda team, we talked about that date, and it's a crowded date, so we were looking at maybe moving that to Wednesday, March 14th. And in addition, adding a second item to that day as a work session, and do first an item on the initiative process and the citizen initiative process, and then second do an item on the board referral process and what that process is and the legal mechanics around that, so that we can address both those items that day. And in that second item, it'll give us a chance to begin the discussion about any possible referral of the two ordinances that we've been requested to refer. So I wanted to bring that up right now and allow folks to give head nods that they're okay with that change to the future agenda items from March 13th to March 14th, and adding a second item to talk about board referral. Is there any
That's good.
objections? Do I have head nods on that? 3 head nods?
With relief that it's not March 15th. That was a bad day for Julius Caesar.
Yeah. Yeah. So March 14th, we'll be having that work session, first on the citizen initiative process and second on the board referral process, as they are two separate processes. So with that, and while we're still on agenda team requests, were there any other agenda team requests from the board? Seeing none, then we'll move on to public comment. And this is where we take comments from the public. You're provided 3 minutes to address the board. And I have a timer here. And if you'll step up to the mic and state your name, where you're from, you don't need to give me your address exactly, because we don't require people to give their address. And then I'll start the timer after that, and you'll have your 3 minutes. So I have Andrew Frost, followed by Jerry Rust.
Hello again, Andrew Frost, Glenwood. You know the basics of my complaint. Last week you said there's nothing you can do. But before we get to that, last week you talked about intimidation, about how hand signals would be an intimidation of people here. You sit behind a power structure that is designed to intimidate, behind dioceses that were essentially, that's an architectural function, is to make us feel smaller and you feel bigger. So just remember that when you're sat up behind there. And also remember that when you talk about engaging in politics and you talk about 4 constituents that can't be here, that might be your contributors, campaign contributors or something, really they should bring themselves down here and put themselves in front of everyone like we do. We all feel the same intimidation. That's the whole point of this structure, isn't it? Now you see, here it is. Architecturally speaking, did you do an architecture course, Mr. Farr? Right, thank you. Psychology of Architecture and Interpersonal Behavior. You should go read the book. Now, you said you couldn't do anything about my complaint, but you can. The official in question is elected, but that's not a law, state law, it's a county thing. The county has decided it. You guys, or we, can bring a proposal to have that a non-elected position. You also control his salary. So he is under your control in many ways. And when he engages in when there's a 21-day payment, you're essentially discriminating against people with fixed incomes. That's most disabled people and and a lot of retirees. So you should address that. I'll listen to this at my home online with a bunch of other constituents. But you shouldn't just ignore it, pretend it's not an issue, that you can't do anything about it when you know damn well you can if you pull your fingers out of your ass and try.
Jerry Russ, followed by Carol Shear.
Morning, Commissioners. I thought I'd try and be positive today. I want to give you my rendition of the last 40 years in Lane County history with herbicides, pesticides, and it starts 40 years ago in this room. I was sitting where Commissioner Williams is, and Archie Weinstein is where Bozovich is, and Lycan, you're sitting in Bob Wood's seat. I moved to cut the commissioner salaries 10%. Second, passed. Next motion, I moved to stop all herbicide spray on Lane County roadways. That means 3,000 miles of right-of-way. Bang, no more spray. It was easy. We found alternatives. And you know, Lane County still has a really good reputation for its roadside vegetation management program. That's positive. Later that decade, we stopped spraying all the bodies of water of central Lane County. That means we sprayed for mosquitoes. I think we used the 7 was the name of that chemical. We ended that, and that was hundreds of thousands of acres every year. I don't think we've had any malaria yet either. 1980s came the gypsy moth, 378,000 acres in central Lane County. The Department of Agriculture proposed to spray, I think it was orethene and dimlet, deadly chemicals for the waterways of Lane County. Through a lot of action, threats of legal action, and a task force which I served on for the Department of Agriculture, and we finally persuaded the state to try the insecticide BT. That's a bacteria, so it's an organic solution. It worked. Lane County became the most successful and largest biochemical, approach to pest control in the United States. It was a tremendous success. It's been repeated several more times. So the other one was the United States Forest Service and the BLM were controlling vegetation in forest management using sprays like 2,4-D, 2,4,5-T. Those two combined, by the way, was Agent Orange, which we're still cleaning up in Vietnam to this day. Billions and billions of dollars. The American taxpayers are still paying out for that cleanup. So that brings us down, and anyway, the Forest Service and the BLM got out of the business. They figured out that there are alternatives that are, in the end, more sustainable and less costly than the helicopter spray program. Now that brings us down to the final chapter, and this is where you play the role. And through your inaction or action, you will make a statement that will be remembered in history. I'd like to know what you'd like to think 40 years later about the action you take here in these coming weeks. I don't plan to have much memory left 40 years from now, but maybe some of you will. You're young enough. Good luck to you. Thanks for taking this issue on, and I look forward to your work session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Carol Shearer, followed by David DeVate.
Hi, I'm Carol Shearer. I'm in Commissioner Williams' district. What a positive story it is when commissioners say we must. That was great what Jerry Russ just shared with us. I had no insight what a difference it could make. And that's what I'm here to say to you today is I want to hear you say we must, not fold your arms and say we can't. And this regards our economy. This regards the Wall Street influence in our state. It regards what's happening in the forest industry because our children are being abused. They already have been abused by the education system, which is suffering great economic lack of resources. They're suffering as far as the health is concerned in their environment. Many are homeless. People are not paid a living wage. They're suffering because their parents cannot afford to take care of them properly. Wall Street is taking from Oregon, and Wall Street is set to take more from Oregon, as are our big moneyed forest barons. They don't care about the people. They care about themselves. So we are very upset about the aerial spraying. We're very upset about the many injustices to our children. It's not about us. And when people are in the way of our children, of us being able to protect our children, we're not necessarily in a good spirit. And we won't be until that is changed. So it's going to get stronger, the movement. It's going to get louder. We're going to use things besides our fingers to show our support for each other because we are growing stronger by the day. I hope that you have watched the 3 videos that I suggested that you look at last week because it gives context to what the situation is that we are faced with. And when you have your meetings in March, I hope that you will learn from that and see what the barriers are, if there are any, and you will, as our employees, say, we must, because we insist that our employees do say we must. And you will look to see if you need to talk with state legislators. You will look to see if you need to talk with boards of other commissions, because it is our children, it's not me, it's the children, and we will not let them be abused. And to work on food or homeless situations, that is working on the effect, not the cause. We want you to work on the cause because that's where the meaningful work is. And there's also the environment issues, of course, with global warming. I appreciate, Commissioner Farr, you continuing to say your door is open because my commissioner door is not open to me. He told me that he knew I was not going to support him, and that he had heard enough from me. So that is another red flag about folding arms and saying we can't. We want a future for our children that is not second to a system that puts short-term gain ahead of people. We insist you must.
Thank you. David DeVate, followed by Katie Geiser.
Hi, my name is David DeVate, and I live in the River Road area of Lane County. I live in Commissioner Pat Farr's district. First, I'd like to thank you, Commissioner Farr, for your pushing for a work session on county initiatives, and to all of you for agreeing to the March 13th or now 14th work session on this. I understand you're wanting to clear the air about this issue and not be accused of obstructing the initiative process if you haven't. At this work session, we want to be present and also be able to give constructive feedback to each other about the process and its legalities. And we are asking you, as Lane County Commissioners, to refer our charter amendments to the Lane County voters as ordinance. We are still asking for that. It's very clear that many Lane County voters want to be able to vote on this issue. We are also asking that for you to tell us where you are on the issue of aerial herbicide spraying in Lane County. We and the voters of Lane County want to know. Of course, this is political. The voters of Lane County deserve to know where each of you individually stand on this issue and before the May election. As a part of this request, we are also asking that you hold a work session that includes us and others on the health and safety issues of aerial herbicide spraying in Lane County and in Western Oregon. Many rural Lane County residents have experienced horrendous deleterious health effects from herbicide drift from timber companies doing aerial spraying. They want to be heard, and you as Lane County Commissioners owe it to your constituents to learn more about this issue rather than just keep trusting the timber and pesticide industry's propaganda on this issue. This is particularly true for Commissioners Bozovich and Williams, who cover the two most rural districts of Lane County, where the most adversely affected Lane County citizens live. This will clearly be a political issue in your re-election campaigns, and you owe it to your voters to be honest with them about where you stand on this issue. As a part of this work session, we will be asking you to consider a resolution to the Oregon State Legislature stating your opposition to state preemption of Oregon counties having the right to have more stringent standards on protecting the health and safety of county residents. This means getting rid of the preemption aspects of the right to farm and forest law. The other aspect of our ask is that you stand up to the Oregon State Legislature for not protecting the citizens of Western Oregon from aerial herbicides spray toxicity and push a resolution to them to ban this egregious practice. The voters of Lane County await your response.
Thank you. Katie Geiser, followed by Brenda Klusman. Thank you for the phonetics.
My name is Katie Geiser. I live in Pete Sorensen's district. As a retired healthcare professional, quality of health has been one of my greatest concerns in life. We are here again to remind you of your lack of action regarding the practice and deadly harm brought by toxic aerial spray in our county. We hold the board accountable for the commitment you made to us in your State of the County address in January. Health quality was mentioned as one of the top concerns of the board. Quotes from then Chair Farr during this event follow. Quote, "Last year marked the second year of our current strategic plan. I'm proud to report that we accomplished many things that help us work toward our vision of Lane County as the best county in which to live, work, and play. Our three priority, again, continuing with the quote, our three priority areas are a safe, healthy county, vibrant communities, and infrastructure." Continuing the quote, "Our public health staff work tirelessly with community members and partners to update our Community Health Improvement Plan. The CHIP, as it's called, is a regional outline to guide how we work together to improve our community's mental, physical, and social health." End of quote. It's past time to include the issue of aerial spraying of herbicides in this effort. As commissioners, you can not only join in addressing this issue in our community, but further do something to remedy it. What is it that will hold you to your commitment of a safe and healthy environment? It's time to take action to remove this outdated toxic practice, which wreaks such devastation in terms of lives, health, and livelihood and well-being. We are, as captives, held beneath a toxic cloud. This is not acceptable. We come with real-life testimony today about the effects of toxic spray. The story of one such life alone should be more than sufficient proof. Oregonian Carol Van Strom, author of Bitter Fog, Herbicides and Human Rights, shares what has happened in her life. Quote, "I have lived and farmed in Lane County for 43 years. The effects of aerial herbicide spraying during the 70s and early 80s on my family, livestock, and neighbors are well documented in several federal lawsuits and in my book, A Bitter Fog. These were nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, internal bleeding, respiratory stress, involuntary abortions, uncontrolled uterine bleeding, and birth defects. Since that time, I have lost 2 babies to involuntary abortions, each within 2 weeks of being sprayed. Traces of the herbicides used were found in the tissue of one dead fetus. My only surviving child was born with physical defects that have required multiple surgeries and caused lifelong chronic pain. After the last aerial spraying of 2,4-D here, every pregnant woman in our valley lost her baby to involuntary abortion, and nearly all households in the valley, including mine, have lost one or more family members to cancer. that even one life should be so affected as a crime. Commissioners, this is a time of action, a time to become educated on this issue and move forward with wisdom and true concern for the health of your constituents. Carol Van Strom's book is one of a vast library on this subject. Be accountable to your commitment to a safe, healthy, and vibrant county. Thank you.
Thank you. Brenda Klusman, followed by Logan Overton. And I was going to ask if you could bring that sheet up. Hold on a second, Brenda. Go ahead.
Good morning, Commissioners. Brenda Klusman, Springfield, Mr. Likens District. At last week's Commissioners meeting, I read to you the most recent Lane County area spray schedule from the January 25th Eugene Weekly, reporting that the Roseburg Resources Timber Company plans to aerial spray a combined area of over 3,500 acres with herbicides southwest of Veneta and near Florence. Just 2 days later, on February 1st, the Eugene Weekly's Lane County Area Information column reported the following, that the Roseburg Resources plans to spray, and I won't itemize the 21 list of chemicals, but they plan to spray 21 chemicals on another 201 acres east of Westford. Roseburg Resources also intends to spray 254 acres west of Veneta with a similar list of chemicals. And Weyerhaeuser Company plans to apply a chlorofenone rodenticide on 348 acres near North Fork Smith River and 179 acres near Sweet Creek and south of Swissholm. In addition, as Mr. Rust referenced, roadside spraying continues. Seneca Jones Timber plans to spray roadsides in Lane County with 2,4-D and other chemicals in the near future. So in total, the aerial spraying for the most recent report totals 822 acres. In 2 weeks, that's over 4,000 acres of land sprayed in Lane County. And so it continues. In these meetings, we've heard many stories about the harmful effects suffered by Lane County citizens, their children, and or neighbors as a result of aerial spraying. Most recently, and I'm putting on my public health researcher hat again, as I follow the medical literature related to aerial spraying pretty closely, the most systematic meta-analysis, a systematic review of all of the current literature of well-designed studies by a group of University of California, Berkeley researchers and they did this meta-analysis of studies on 2,4-D alone. It was published in the Annals of Epidemiology, the April 2017 issue. They found that new evidence for an association between exposure to the herbicide 2,4-D and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a cancer of the lymph system. I appreciate your scheduling a work session on this vital, critical health issue in our county, and thank you for your support of our requests to discuss and decide what to do about this terrible problem we have here in Lane County. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Logan Overton, followed by Rob Dickinson.
My name is Logan Overton. I live around Cottage Grove in Commissioner Williams' district, I believe. All right. So, as other people have mentioned, of course, this petition will be struck down in the courts if it goes to ballot and it gets voted on in the positive to ban aerial spraying. But I would venture that this doesn't mean we shouldn't allow it to go to ballot, because that's just a basic function of democracy, and even if it does get struck down in courts, which I believe it inevitably will be when it does, it will be lodged as a protest vote by the by the constituents of Lane County against state law and allow the county's voice to be heard in this matter, along with Josephine and other counties that have tried similar measures in regards to other laws that also go against the statewide right to farm law. Now, last week, the chair of the board claimed that there is a marked difference in how the aerial spray ban effort is being conducted here as opposed to the previous Josephine County GMO ban that would leave commissioners liable for approving such a potential piece of legislation. I looked a little bit into it, and they're both marked as ballot initiatives, wherein they have the same underlying principles: signature collection, ballot initiative, and they're both against literally the same state law. Only now there seems to be a wrench in the gear somewhere, which the chair of the board, Bozovich, mentioned, that this is a commissioner-referred petition and that it would apparently be positive action to allow an initiative petition to go to ballot. I would, of course, argue that this falls directly in line with an action office that they're allowed to do within their duties and arguably supposed to do. That does not legally equate to them deciding to enact the petition as county law. There were remarks also made about memos specifically on September 13, 2016 that pertain to this issue, referenced by legal counsel, which I presume to mean the OLC. But they're decidedly hard to find. If there are any better sites to find these memos or search terms to use, I'd like to know, so that we might be more informed about the ballot initiative process and how it affects our elected officials. And if they prove my ongoing case wrong, I do not have to keep harping on this point and instead invest my time in more meaningful efforts than arguing Oregon state law. And I heard complaints that we are making this an election issue, as other people have referenced today. And I would say this is an inaccurate assessment, because I'm sure my fellow petitioners would say that public health is a very important election issue. And many people have voiced their displeasure with wavering statements that have been issued from elected officials that are seeming to be in opposition with simply putting an initiative petition on the ballot. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Rob Dickinson, followed by something Kohler, and begins with a G. I cannot read the handwriting, so hopefully whoever that is will know who they are. Go ahead, Rob.
Yes, good morning. I'm Rob Dickinson from unincorporated Cottage Grove. As part of my remarks today, I'd like to address a comment made by Chair Bozovich at the last meeting that we were here, in which he, responding to the people in the audience who made public comments, had a relatively angry response saying that somehow us being here was essentially a political stunt that was unworthy of commissioners' action or referral. And I think that really does disrespect the serious concerns of the people that have showed up here today. We've had many people, dozens of people, come here from all over Lane County, from Florence and Deadwood and Triangle Lake and Notai and Marcola and Cottage Grove, Springfield, as well as Eugene, people taking many hours of time off from work and other obligations to be here. No one really wants to be here. We are here because we think that what we're asking for is for the commissioners to simply do their job. And in this case, when we have tens of thousands of people signing petitions asking for action on an urgent public health crisis, that is a legitimate request that we think you should act on. We're not saying that you should support the ballot measures that we're proposing or even endorse them. We're actually fine if you oppose them. But really, we just think that the number of people who have come forward and asked for this choice deserve that as a response in terms of representative democracy. To say that it's a political sort of stunt or something that is really, I think, unreasonable. Really, the people that have come here have come and shared their personal stories, many of which are of loss and hardship, and in some cases illness and other things. You know, as much as, you know, one of the objections we had was that the work session was being scheduled after the election. And we really do believe that it should be scheduled before the election for a very good reason, okay? As citizens, we can't make our elected officials, our representatives, do what we need. We can't make them do their job. We can't ask them, we can't have them protect the public's health and safety. All we can do is come here and speak, but we have no power over you. The only power is the accountability that comes from elections. And so, you know, as much as we wish this weren't the case, I think there is a sentiment that if the work session were held in May, that there would be no further desire to act because the public's ability to influence politics diminishes after an election. And so we think that it's very legitimate for all the people who have come out and expressed their support for having this choice throughout the 2 years that we've been circulating petitions to know where people stand. That's a very simple thing. I can't imagine, Chair Bozievich, that you're really arguing that accountability is a bad thing in a democratic system. As much as we hope that democracy would function because of trust and shared values, the accountability is the only thing that really makes it work. And so therefore, we really do ask that you take action soon and before the election.
Thank you. So, and I'm sorry I can't read the first name on this, but Kohler Goss.
Hello. Good morning. It's Katya Kohler-Goss. Hi, I live in Cottage Grove, and I'm an organic farmer. And it's difficult for me to be to attend these meetings in the morning because of my job. I live in Commissioner Williams' district, and back in December I emailed you and phoned you, and I didn't hear back from you. This is a little bit of something I wrote, and I hope you have the time. I know you're very busy, but I hope you have the time to read it and respond to my email. I'd really appreciate it. So just a section of it, says, that evening I smelled the poison in the mist. Our family became sick with flu-like symptoms, and one of my sons had heavy nosebleeds. The next morning he woke up with his pillow covered in blood. About 2 weeks later, many of our crops looked sickly, and we lost a couple of fruit trees. I sent photos of our plants to agronomists and weed specialists, and they confirmed that our plants were harmed by herbicides. You mentioned in previous meetings that in a previous meeting that you had talked to a few farmers in your district who expressed support for aerial spraying. I encourage you to bring those farmers, myself and other organic farmers in the area, and there are many, together to talk about how unsafe herbicide application from helicopters and airplanes threaten the entire farming community and economy in Lane County. I would love to hear their concerns and share mine. I think you will find as farmers have more in common than you might imagine. My livelihood, as well as the livelihood of other organic farmers and businesses like Mountain Rose Herbs, plant nurseries, breweries, and others, depends on ensuring crops are organic and free from herbicide damage and contamination. When herbicides drift, it infringes on the rights of farmers and families like mine. If you look at the studies of drift studies too, drift is inevitable. No study has ever shown that aerial applications are safe. It happens. It threatens our health, our economic security, and our community at large. It is trespass and a violation of our property rights and right to pursue life and liberty. My own son in Cottage Grove had high levels of glyphosate in his urine. We don't use glyphosate, but the Oregon Department of Forestry found levels of glyphosate in the soil in a tree farm that Weyerhaeuser had recently sprayed by helicopter. Glyphosate has been found to be a probable carcinogen. We couldn't afford to test for any other poisons, and we couldn't afford to test our water, and they used many different poisons in this application. We sent in a sample of his urine to a national certified lab, and here are the results, which I will show you afterwards. His levels came out higher than what is generally found with a farm worker who has been spraying. It is assumed that the farm worker wore protective clothing, and here are his results. That was I also spoke with a toxicologist with the Department of Health who agreed that these were reputable, this was a reputable lab, and that his levels came out higher than the average, although we really shouldn't have it in our urine at all. Also, the chemicals used in aerial spraying are not properly tested. Please do read about them, become ultra-informed. Poison spraying, this book that I have here with me that Williams, I would like to let you borrow if you haven't already read it. The author, E.G. Vallanatos, worked for the EPA Pesticide Division for 25 years. He exposes the faulty practices of the chemical companies that sell these chemicals. He interviews scientists who have exposed their harms and also many people that have been harmed by pesticides. He devotes one full chapter on the aerial spraying in Oregon. Please read it. I would like to discuss it with you afterwards. Yeah, so this is my copy here, and my contact info is inside of it too. I encourage all of you to read it if you haven't already done so, and I encourage you to use your position to bring together the community to protect all farmers and end aerial spraying from helicopters and other aircrafts here in Lane County. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. James Barber, followed by Abel Kloster.
Good morning, Commissioners. Got about 6 points to make today. Name's James Barber, live in Commissioner Williams' district, and I am a candidate for that position. First, I want to thank you for scheduling the work session on the Citizens Initiative. I think that'll be helpful, and now that you're adding the referral process to March 14th work session, that is also good. And also thank you, Chair, for letting these guys speak over the time limit. It's a good testimony. My second point, it was a bit disheartening to hear both Chair Bozovich and Commissioner Williams call efforts to get the aerial spray ban on the ballot political. I mean, of course it's political, but only in the sense that every decision made by elected officials is political. However, the people spraying poison on other people and in the soil and water, that's not political. Chemical trespass can affect everyone no matter what your political affiliation is. And these folks are mad because their efforts to protect themselves and their friends and their families are being stymied by the political process. So of course they're angry about that. It's frustrating. This isn't a game. This is about our health, and the deck is stacked against the people and is creating a sense of powerlessness. Third point, Chair Bozovich, you mentioned the letter that the petitioner sent to you that made it clear it was political. If that's the same letter that was published in the Register Guard, the way I read that part of the letter, it was them letting you know that there's people out there that they've spoken with who are not planning on voting for you in May due to the perceived obstruction. They were asking you to hold the work session before the primary as advice to help you with some of those people so that they know how to act. I'm not sure why that would make you upset or want to decry their efforts as political, but perhaps you had a different interpretation. I would suggest maybe reconsidering the context of that. On a slightly different note, and my number 4 point, Commissioner Williams, you talked about 4 people calling in support of the aerial spray ban because it helps their bottom line. The passionate testimony you've been hearing is about people's health. Businesses don't have to use helicopters to spray. They have other options, but the people do not. We have to breathe, we have to drink water, we have no other alternatives other than to try and stop the aerial spraying of poisons. So please don't try to equate 4 people with an interest in protecting their profits to 15,000 signatures from people with an interest in protecting their health. Number 5, there was a handful of people recently coming to the commissioners about One Grow and their neighborhood being disturbed, and you held a work session on that to try and figure out how to help solve their problem. And you're still trying to help them as well you should. How many work sessions have you had regarding aerial spraying of poisons? My final point, I'm running for commissioner because I find it unacceptable for our commissioners to shrug their shoulders and say that they're preempted by the state. That seems to happen quite a bit when business interests collide with public and the environment health. It's your job to solve the problems for the people of Lane County, and at least 15,000 people have now agreed that this is a problem. So please consider that during your referral work session. Thanks.
Abel Kloster, followed by Justin Workman.
Morning, Commissioners. I'm from the Cottage Grove area, and just here to speak on the aerial spray initiative. My experience is in forestry and farming. I'm a farmer and a forester. I manage forestry land trust outside of Cottage Grove, and I also, as my livelihood, I consult through the state of the Oregon Department of Forestry on developing forest plans for landowners in the state of Oregon here. And, you know, as you know, probably Lane County has the most private forests of anywhere in the state. And many of those forest lands are essentially up in the upland landscapes, right? And most of those lands are owned by the bigger timber corporations, but many of them are owned by smaller landowners, and I consult with those smaller landowners. And I'm here to say that I just wanted to speak to the fact that there's many other ways to go about timberland management that don't involve, you know, clear-cut rotations that require aerial spray. In fact, you know, there's about 6 distinct timber-based forest management methodologies, and the aerial spray approach is just one kind of very methodology of the clear-cut rotation method. Now, I was trained by a European forester who learned selective cut methods, and some of those, you know, one of the challenges with forestry in the temperate climates is it's slow, you know, so the research comes slow, but there have been a few Pacific Northwest examples, 50 to 60 year experiments in the economics of selective harvest that don't involve any use of herbicides at all. And those examples have shown, they're on the record, they've shown that a 40-year selective harvest is more profitable than a 40-year clear-cut rotation. So my point is that the banning of aerial spray is not going to lead to, you know, economic, over the long term, it's not going to lead, it doesn't imply economic harm. What it will imply is it will bring about a more you know, a more creative and nuanced approach to forestry. And that's what we need. Many of the people that I represent and work for, they live adjacent to these timberlands, which are aerially sprayed, and they manage their forests in a very different way, and they're frustrated with that. Myself, living at the bottom of a valley, this year, we were adjacent to timberland that was aerially sprayed, and for the following 2 days, we smelled the herbicide settling in our valley. I have a 4-month-old, and we had to keep him inside those 2 days. So I wanted to come today just to speak from the forester's perspective, and say that you know, there's alternatives, and as a forest culture here in the Pacific Northwest, I think that it's important that we acknowledge that there's a really wide set of approaches to forestry, and also that it's really important for the citizenry to be involved in envisioning what their forestry systems could look like, and that's what this vote represents. So thanks.
Justin Workman, followed by Bernadette Barrasso.
Justin Workman, Triangle Lake. I still haven't heard from you, Mr. Lyken. Last I heard was before the holidays, and you said that you would get back to me in a few weeks, which would be mid-January, and I haven't heard from you as far as setting up an appointment to get together to talk about this issue. I was here last week and mentioned that too, and I still haven't heard from you. Commissioner Williams, I know Mr. Barber tapped into you for a minute there, but you did receive some phone calls. You said 3 to 4 phone calls from people. explaining how they wanted aerial pesticides to continue, apparently, because of income and revenues, businesses. Is that correct? Okay. Well, I just wonder if you put health above money, and if you see where we're coming from, and if you understand, like, why we're here. I've been through the ropes on all these agencies, and here we are, you know. We need your help. We need to come together and work together, guys. I'm from Triangle Lake. I could name so many people that called me and told me they were poisoned or affected by aerial sprays. Once my neighbors found out I was working on this issue, I got the phone calls at my home and emails. Mrs. Jen Rupert has the most telling email I've ever read. On the first day back, must have been September 8th, 2015, first day of school for the Triangle Lake kids. She took her kids, she lives right by the school too. She drove her kids to the campus on Triangle Lake, and her whole family was poisoned that day. First day back. Department of Agriculture did an investigation and found that the sprays that she had mentioned that she thought had poisoned her were 2.2 miles away. The Highway 36 Triangle Lake investigation, human health exposure investigation, found that the sprays that affected and spiked my kids' urine and my family's and all, there was 9 people that went in and took a second urine sample. All of their urine spiked that day. And then the investigation found that those sprays were 2.6 miles away. This is no joke. This stuff travels off course, whether it's by accident or by mistake. Down in Curry County, Coos Bay, they were poisoned by mistake. And those people contacted me to find out what they could do. That is bizarre. I'm a citizen. You know, I am not working for the OHA and health regulatory agencies, and people are calling me. You got to understand, Mr. Williams, that I've received more phone calls about stopping this stuff than you have about continuing it. And I have no official position. I've seen it, I hear it. Mrs. Helen Hollier on Camas Swell. I worked her property, and when she got sprayed, they backpack sprayed 10 days earlier because they knew she was watching. And they didn't change their ODF notification, and they broke laws. And so they came and sprayed 10 days early, and she didn't know that. And she walks the property line, and she was sick and barely could breathe for 2 weeks. And she didn't know what happened until ODF told her that they came in and backpack sprayed early. And then they went ahead and sprayed with a helicopter off of the property line. This stuff is continuing. It's all around the state. There's so many people that have been affected and poisoned. I just wish you would stop and listen to them and forget about the revenues of a company and who is giving you money to be up here. Please, people are getting poisoned. Dan and Mariana Gee, another set of neighbors, has rashes and pictures from when they were spraying nearby Seneca Jones. I was in my house with my children looking out my child's bedroom window and watched Seneca Jones helicopter spray the mountainside that poisoned my family, where my children coughed and vomited for 7 months. Coughed, vomited for 7 months. And we watched it out the kids' window. This shit's real. It's happening. We need your help. Thank you.
Thank you. Bernadette Barraza, and that's the last person I've signed up.
People that come after me always forget to put the mic back up. Pay attention. My name is Bernadette Barraza. I live in the county just South Eugene, Governor Williams, Governor, I just promoted you, Commissioner Williams District. I'm wearing this scarf today in tribute to all the women who wear this type of thing due to losing their hair to chemotherapy. The first friend that I lost was in 1983. She was really young at the time, so was I. We were in our early 30s. We had little girls that were in the same preschool. I went to her funeral. She went through the program first, surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, wore a scarf like this. But she died, left behind her husband and 2 young children. I won't list all the friends that I have lost since her. Many women survive, but they lose their breasts, they lose their uteruses, they have no further chance to have children, and they live in fear that it will return. This happens to men, too. This happens to little children. I have a nephew who lost his leg after the chemotherapy and the surgeries and the radiation, and they gave him a artificial leg, but he doesn't know when it'll come back, when he'll lose the other leg. If we're lucky enough, we will all see the day when we don't have carcinogens in our air, in our soil, in our water, in our food, in our clothing, on our couches, in our carpets. If you haven't been touched yet or touched enough to be on the bandwagon with all these people behind me, then I only hope that you'll choose to err on the side of caution and slow things down a little bit, just in case maybe it's not a good idea to have poison in our atmosphere. Michelle Holman isn't here today because she has a brand new grandson, and she's an example of why we're going to keep coming back. We are grandparents. We care about the future. We don't have that many years left, maybe, but we care about our children and our grandchildren and other people's grandchildren. And if I seem confrontational, and I think I speak for other people, I just feel a desperation. You know, we're trying to go through the legal system. We really are. But just imagine this organic farmer up against Monsanto, or that mother up against the timber industry. It's really difficult. So try to help us. I'm just going to quit.
Thank you. That was the last person I have signed up to speak today. And I'll ask real quick, is there anyone else that wants to address the board this morning before we move on? Seeing none, then we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is Commissioner's response to public comments and or other issues and remonstrance. Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to say that for the lady that left the book here, I wrote down the ISBN number for that, so you're welcome to come and get that. I have the information that I need. And I thank you for the opportunity.
Commissioner Sorensen.
One of the references here earlier today was to the right to forest and farm law, and that came up in our work session involving the problems in the Cresswell area where there's a large marijuana grow operation, and the residents, some of them came in to complain about the some of the issues connected to it. Some involved what I would call law enforcement issues of people bringing high-powered weaponry in to protect, apparently to protect the crop, but also somewhat intimidating to the neighbors. Others involving agricultural conflict over the smell from the operation of some sort, and essentially what the response was that the Oregon right to forest and farm law does prohibit the victim of the alleged trespass of chemicals or fertilizer or other items going across the owner's land and onto the victim's land or into the victim's body. And it prohibits those victims or alleged victims, to be fair, because again, you would want to have a dispute and you'd want to have a resolution to move from victim to alleged, or move from alleged victim to victim, but it prohibits the victim. Now, the victim could be, as occurred in Jackson County, the victim could be a winery, and the perpetrator could be a timber company. And in fact, in that instance, the winery sued the timber company. But because of the Oregon Right to Forest and Farm Act, the victim who lost millions of dollars worth of fines was required to pay the expert witness fees and attorney fees of the timber company. So it isn't just a matter of personal taking away the rights of individuals to have their own health. It's also, in a commercial context, something that's really contrary to the idea of fairness in our legal system, where a victim, or at least someone who thinks they're a victim, has a right to resolve that. Now, the Oregon Court of Appeals upheld the constitutionality of the Oregon Right to Farm and Forest Act. It has not been upheld by the Oregon Supreme Court yet. It's my view that eventually the Oregon Supreme Court will look at our Oregon Constitution that says that people have a right to a civil remedy, and they will conclude that the legislature took away that right when it passed this law. So to me, we've got to keep in mind that change takes time, and it takes different forms. And, you know, I guess as a person that's been involved in these issues, forest, herbicide issues, pesticide issues for like almost a half century now, that people have to realize that eventually the practice of aerial application of pesticides will be abolished. It just isn't going to work. It really just is not going to work. There's just no way to constrain the drift. There's no way to keep it from harming others or hurting other people's businesses. And to me, it's just something that we have to keep speaking out against. And is it the legislature? Is it the Congress? Is it the Lane County Board of Commissioners? Who allows this to happen? The public? Who allows all this to happen? Well, the answer is they all do. The public hasn't passed an initiative. The board hasn't passed a letter to write a letter to the legislature. The legislature has gone the opposite direction. So to me, it's just a matter of struggle. And I really appreciate the people coming here and talking about these issues. I hope this work session is run fairly. I hope it's open, and I hope that we're able to push it to an action item.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see that former Commissioner Rust has left. He and I have something in common. We're both tree planters in earlier lives. Tree planters live through the winter in order to get to spring. I thought I'd share those words with him, so someone could pass them along. I just wanted to mention very specifically a couple of people who spoke today. Rob Dickinson, David Tveit, former Commissioner Rust, Abel Kloster, is that the correct pronunciation? Thank you for your tone, your tenor, and your recommendations and suggestions. The way you presented your testimony, I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I just want to say thank you to folks who came here this morning to offer your public comment. I've remonstrated on this now 3 board meetings. I think you've heard my comments, and so there's no reason to continue with the same thing over and over again. I'm a strong believer that Lane County is a subdivision of the state of Oregon. I think my record as mayor to county commissioner has shown that, and I'm going to leave it at that for now. I do highly support the meeting coming up in March, and I just want to reiterate one more time that when we said May 23rd, that was only a hold. We never set that date in stone. And the word hold was actually mentioned. And so anyway, so I'm just going to leave it at that. What I really wanted to talk about was to the board. I knew her pretty well, and I was very, very sorry to see Liz Chambers pass away this last week. And for folks who don't know her, I mean, yeah, the Chambers family is a very prominent family, but Liz, I got to tell you, is one of the most salt-of-the-earth individuals you'd ever meet. And she just really never had any airs about her. And I just wanted to say I was very, very sorry to hear about her passing. It was, I just turned 56, so that age is a little too close to home. And on another topic, I lost my brother to cancer July 15th, 2013 at 8:05 p.m. Pacific time. So I remember it quite clearly, the date and time that my brother passed away from cancer. He was in Illinois, so he was not here, and which made it even tougher because we were so far away from home. He was 49 years old, so he's actually just not quite 2 years younger than me. So I think loss, I understand that, because until I married my wife, Debbie, my brother Brad was my best pal buddy my entire life. And that'll go down as one of the most challenging times I've ever had to face in my entire lifetime. And but I just wanted to put that out there. I appreciate the comments. Hopefully, between Judge Rasmussen's decision and what's going to come up on May 15th, maybe some of your questions will be answered, and we'll just kind of go from there. And but I just hope you realize we are trying to listen. And if I'm accused of my stating that our hands are tied, I'll accept that, because there are laws, there's state laws in the books, and our hands in a sense are tied. But we are listening. We're trying to figure this out. We're trying to navigate as well, and I hope you understand that. But for some reason, I think there's some folks who don't. But I will say, from the comments I heard this morning, I appreciate the comments I heard this morning, because I think you understand that we're trying to navigate this too, along with you, to try to figure this out. And for the record, in 2014, my largest contributor was actually our Public Works Union. So I'll leave. In 2018, sure, that's changed. I don't run based on who gives money to me. Never have. And in fact, it's been pointed out, I actually come from the timber industry. My family, my great-grandfather was Oscar Holt, so I know the timber industry pretty well. I've been through it, and if there's anybody who can stand up and say no, it's actually somebody who's been through it. And believe me, all the folks who've contributed have never once asked me for a favor, ever, because they know they can't. And so, again, I appreciate the comments, and we'll try to figure this out as we go through not only the legal process of Judge Rasmussen, but when we have a work session in March. As Commissioner Sorensen said, it is one of these things that's probably going to take some time. And really, that's all I can leave you at this point in time. But thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you. So I want to start by saying that it was interesting to hear former Commissioner Rust talk about one of the first things he did was cut salaries, because that was one of the first things I did when I became a commissioner. So we have that in common. And in addition to cutting salaries, cut office budgets, staff for commissioners, and also voted no 3 times on our pay raise. So we do kind of hold that value in common. What I would like to try and clarify a little bit is I appreciate the tone of comments this morning, but I believe Mr. Dickinson restated my comments about the political effort incorrectly and kind of put some words in my mouth. What I was speaking to was in the last bullet point of that letter, and up to that point there had been no mention of elections or election issues or anything in any of the efforts from the petitioners or people representing those petitioners when I met with them in December. It was all up to that point about the board possibly helping refer an ordinance on these two initiatives and being assistance and recognizing the support from the community for the two initiatives through the ballot, through the signature gathering process for the charter amendments. That was the first time somebody actually mentioned making an election issue and holding people accountable and several other things just because of a date we put in a placeholder. And my comments about that were, at that point, that's kind of politicizing the issue. And what it gets into then is a question of our continued effort to assist in the referral process. Is that considered a public use of funds for a political effort? And I'll tell this little story. I'll put a little supposition out there. If it was, perchance, Oregonians for Immigration Reform that was coming before us, who maybe had collected signatures for a charter amendment that would have placed something on the ballot that required Lane County to use local funds for immigration enforcement against the state law that preempts us from using local funds for immigration enforcement, I would be questioning in the same way if they had said, we want you to rule on this before an election because we want to hold you guys accountable on your statements about whether you're going to refer this ballot measure or not and your support for this issue. I would be saying our placement of that on the ballot to prevent them from having to spend the money to collect enough signatures to do it as a citizen initiative would be public use of funds for a political purpose, where I'd actually be showing, support for that effort. So when I look at these, it's not about what it's about. It's about what does the law say? And I have to look at it in that way because if we do willingly violate law, we do place the citizens of this county on the hook for legal expenses and possible damages, as well as ourselves. And if anyone wants to try and go back and track how much money Lane County spent on the Dumdye versus Handy case, it was $750,000. That's a pretty hefty sum to defend us, whether we were found guilty or not, and whether we, that's a lot of money. So I take seriously whether it be OFER coming to us asking us to do something that violates state law relative to immigration enforcement, or whether it's you folks coming and talking about whether we can violate the state law on the right to farm and forest practices. It's a similar issue in a lot of ways. And there are people that would be violently opposed to some of those issues and extremely in support of some of those issues. The issue and content of what is being referred is not at issue here. It's whether or not what is being referred violates state law or not, and then also whether it's being done to advance somebody's political agenda. And until we got this letter and that last bullet item that said that they wanted to use it as an election issue, it hadn't been political up to that point. So I hope you understand that I was not saying that there is politics in any referral. We all know that, and there's politics in this issue. But at that point, we hadn't been asked to advance something and assist in advance something specifically to make it an election issue. So I hope that clarifies that issue a little bit, and also kind of clarifies that I wouldn't support OFER asking us to break state law when it comes to immigration law either. So I just want to put that out there, and I appreciate the tone today, and hopefully we'll get to our work sessions on the 14th, and that gives our legal staff about three to 4 weeks, because they have to get most of their materials in a good week before board meetings to go do the research and make some good recommendations to us, and hopefully we'll find out a bit more then. Doesn't mean that we've taken that May 23rd off as a placeholder either for follow-up action. So there's always the ability for this to continue beyond the March 14th work sessions. So if there's no further remonstrance, I'd like to move on to our next agenda items, which first is emergency business. Is there any emergency business today?
No.
Seeing none, then we'll move on to the consent calendar, and these are items that are routine, and if there was any need for discussion, they would have been pulled from the consent calendar under adjustments to the agenda, and you can go to our agenda online and click on the view materials if you want to see additional details, but this gets handled in a single motion with no discussion. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? Commissioner Lycan.
Mr. Chair, move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Lycan, seconded by Commissioner Williams to approve the consent calendar for Tuesday, February 6, 2018. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. So that moves us on to item 6, County Administration announcements.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to hold on that so we can get Mr. Kyler to do the update into Salem.
Great.
And then do our 10:30 time certain.
Yep, thank you. So, Alex, I'm sorry you had to wait that long because I know you need to get to Salem, but this is important too.
Yep.
So, go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Alex Kyler, the Lane County Intergovernmental Relations Manager. You have before you in your packet a memo from me that has 2 items that came from the January 31st, 2018 meeting of the Lane County Legislative Committee. One item is Attachment A, which has a series of bill recommendations that resulted from the pre-session filed bills for the 2018 February session, which began yesterday. There's one typo that I wanted to bring to your attention, which is in the Senate bill section of the memo. So it'd really be page 3 of Attachment A. At the second bill on that page is Senate Bill 1531. I neglected to put in the recommended position, and so I'll do that now. It's recommend oppose on Senate Bill 1531. So, Mr. Chair, if it's okay with you, I'll just start with the bill recommendations.
Sure.
Okay. So this is Attachment A that we're talking about. There are the thing I think I bring to your attention before you might want to get into any sort of questions for me. The first bill there, House Bill 4069, relating to lottery revenues. If you recall, commissioners, immediately, well, not immediately, but it was after the full session when I did the legislative wrap-up from 2017. There was also a priority given or recommended that the board adopted to work on during this interim, and that was this bill. It wasn't a bill at the time, it was a concept relating to lottery revenues, and we call it a true-up of lottery revenues. So this, I sort of took it out of order and put it at the top here because this was already a priority that the board had established. And in fact, it was heard yesterday in Salem. Commissioner Lycan came up and testified. Sarah Means came up and testified on behalf of the Oregon Economic Development Association, to which she's president. And on cue, she's here. Thank you. You done, thank you. But anyway, we had a good hearing on the bill. There is a -1 amendment to the measure that improves it after conversations with both the Oregon Lottery and the Department of Administrative Services. So we are hopeful that that bill is on the move.
Mr. Chair, real quickly, I just want to let folks know that my representative, John Lively, is actually the one who's introduced it on behalf of the counties, and it has support by all 36 counties in the state. So this is very strongly supported, but I want to thank Representative Lively, which I did yesterday as well, and also Senator Hansel, a former county commissioner, is also being a co-presenter as well from the Senate side. So we're in good shape on that from that perspective. Thank you.
Excellent point, Commissioner. Like the little bit of detail here is that during the short session, representatives are limited to 2 priority bills, and so Representative Lively was willing to use one of his bills on this priority for counties, and much appreciated. This is sort of an issue that's plagued us for a little bit. So at any rate, during legislative committee, I think the most debate of these bills in Attachment A House Bill 4001, which is the second bill on the first page, also has a companion measure in the Senate, which is Senate Bill 1507. There was a fair amount of discussion about these measures. They're both they're not quite identical, but they're close, and they're both relating to greenhouse gas emissions. And so there was quite a bit of discussion at committee about that measure. The other one that there was a fair amount of discussion about was House Bill 4007, which is relating to housing. You may know this more as the document recording fee bill. That's it's a measure that's been sort of around the block in Salem as well.
Mr. Chair. Just want to ask a question. Back on the greenhouse gas, what's the position of LOC on the greenhouse gas bills, the Senate and House bills?
LOC or AOC?
No, LOC.
League of Oregon Cities.
In other words, who's pushing? Who is pushing besides the environmental community? Who's pushing for the greenhouse gas bill in the short session?
Chair Bozievich, Commissioner Sorensen, I'm sorry, I don't know the position of LOC. I did see there's some testimony from the city of Eugene that supports the measure.
Okay.
These are, in fact, both of them did have hearings yesterday. They continue. There will be a fairly large hearing tomorrow on.
Why would you recommend we oppose the bills?
Well, in legislative committee, what we really focused on was that. So this concept was introduced almost literally on the last day of the 2017 session. I think it was probably the last bill introduced for that session. Now comes a 35-day session, which was established to try to deal with budgetary issues, and the committee focused on the complexity of these issues for this short session. So it really wasn't a conversation too much about the merits of the bills. More so, it was about the appropriateness to deal with this kind of issue in a 35-day session. The previous bill I described relating to lottery revenues, we felt like it was a perfect fit for the 2018 session because it does deal with a budgetary issue. And this is the kind of thing that, in my experience, I've seen the short session being sort of used because of the urgency and the need to continually move bills along. That, like, if they're not heard this first week, they really have a challenge to advance. And so there's just not a whole lot of opportunity for public input and transparency on these things.
Well, I'll just take exception to this. Number one, it does, your report says it'll raise about $700 million a year, so it is a budget issue. Number two, my understanding is although there's some opposition, plenty of opposition, they did push ahead with a hearing. And so, you know, the main issues for any session, whether short or long, is are bills getting hearings. If bills don't get hearings, then they're probably not going to be considered too much further. So, but anyway, thank you for your information. Also, were there any other cities that opposed the bill? You mentioned Eugene was for it. Any other cities?
Chair Bozievich and Commissioner Sorensen, I was focusing mostly on 4069 yesterday when this thing was, so I don't know where the cities are.
Thank you very much.
So at any rate, the doc recording fee bill was one that generated a fair amount of conversation. Let's see, we've got a couple other things that did grab our attention. House Bill 4034 relating to areas within an urban growth boundary that are zoned for single-family dwellings is a measure that actually takes away some language that counties develop code for accessory dwelling units that passed in 2017 but has not been effective yet. And so this bill, House Bill 4034, undoes that. We did talk about that to some degree during the committee hearing. Moving down the page, we talked a little bit about the technical fixes to the transportation measure for the transportation package from 2017, because we've got a little bit of language in that bill to clean up some details around the jurisdictional transfer of territorial highway from the state to the county. We also spoke briefly about House Bill 4097, the law library bill. It's worded a little bit funny, but we ultimately landed on a recommend monitor support on that one. There's a few bills that we addressed relating to marijuana, particularly 4110.
That's
in
the
the
free
House
marijuana,
measures.
right?
That has to do with sampling of
free marijuana.
Free marijuana, yeah. So those were the sort of the focus on House bills of the committee. In the Senate side, again, Senate Bill 1507 is relating to climate change. We did talk. The sheriff talked a little bit about Senate Bill 1531, which we did ultimately recommend to oppose. In spite of it being a Senator Manning bill, that's one of the things that the committee takes into account is looks at who are the either chief sponsors or co-sponsors of these measures. We did also focus a little bit on Senate Bill 1555 relating to the Oregon marijuana account. The bill as introduced had a fairly significant change to taxation of the state tax. I had a meeting yesterday with Senator Elizabeth Steiner Hayward, whose bill it is, and there is an amendment coming to that bill that I think we can live with, and there's a hearing on the measure at 1 o'clock today. The final bill there, well, actually, I think we also discussed Senate Bill 1556 quite a bit relating to trust deeds. This is a measure that would, as I say here, render moot Lane County's participation in a lawsuit that seeks to recover lost revenue. This is a bill that was defeated last session and has come about again. It's being heard tomorrow. County Counsel Dingell is very eager for us to oppose this bill. It really does have the legislative branch sort of interfering with what is going on in the judicial branch, and we don't find that it's a very appealing bill for counties at all. And then the final one is Senate Bill 1566, which is a fairly creative approach to helping employers as they deal with PERS, and would create some matching funds from the state government to help employers create side accounts to deal with some of the their employer-related costs on PERS. It's not completely clear where the money for those matching funds would come from. I do note that this bill actually has 4 public hearings scheduled, so we expect to see quite a bit of interest in it. So that really summarizes my overview of Attachment A, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions that the commissioners may have.
Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And real quickly, so we had a special ops conference call last night. Commissioner Bozovich and I both were part of. And what I will tell you is that strong, and I mean a strong opposition to SB 1556, the MERS issue, and so from special ops. Also, we had a good conversation on the ADU one, and as well, and so I think we're all in line as far as the association. With the two that Commissioner Sorensen brought up, just so you know, I agree on it being being the short session. I'm having issues with that as well. And I think it sounds like to me the Senate's not going to move forward on their end of it in the short session, so it'll come back in the long session. But so the committee I co-chair, the Transportation Committee Development, we are taking this bill up in our next meeting on the 12th, and probably going to have a pretty significant discussion on it, on where AOC is going to come down as well as part of the statewide association. That's all I have, and I'll wait for if there's additional questions before making the first motion here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Farr.
Two things real quickly. We just kind of brushed by 4007, HB 4007. Well, I don't want to bring that up right now, but a lot of people are looking at that one, and we are monitoring it, as is AOC. So that's all I'm going to say about that. And Mr. Chair, if I may, I'd like to make motion 1A, move to adopt the slate of positions on the bills outlined in attachment A.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Farr, seconded by Commissioner Lycan. Discussion of the motion. Mr. Sorensen.
Thank you very much. I will be voting no on this. There are obviously bills in here that I do support, and I do appreciate the work that you're doing. But I'm going to be voting no on this because I think that the greenhouse gas emissions legislation is a really important part of this session. I don't agree that the purpose of a special session or a short session is to deal with just one thing. I think the legislature didn't adopt this last time. Our own local former state senator, Chris Edwards, was very instrumental in working on this legislation, has been working with the business community to make it acceptable. I think it's telling. I didn't know the city of Eugene was backing the legislation, but I think that's very significant. I think that we're going to look back on this and say, wow, why didn't we do this? Why didn't we move ahead with addressing an approach to greenhouse gases, and that also helps with our state revenue picture. And I just think that it's important distinguishing component of this legislation. Imagine if we took the opposite view, that we said a lot of the creative people in Lane County's business environment have been involved in putting this legislation together, and we would say, wow, let's try to make this work. Let's take a really unbelievably complex subject like greenhouse emissions, and let's turn it around to the benefit of Oregon business. So I don't agree with the idea that the session isn't designed for this type of legislation. I think if the legislative leadership is allowing hearings on the bill, there must be some pretty significant support. And I think we need to be part of the support rather than saying, oh, maybe next time, maybe next time, maybe next time. That's exactly the position we took last year, I might add,
Commissioner,
on this bill.
Oh, forget it.
So real quickly, there are no analysis available on this bill at all to the legislature. Not revenue, not fiscal on it, and no analysis at all that you can get to for the public. So at this point, it's those bills on the carbon trade and invest system are completely in the dark as to what impact they will really have. The estimations on revenue and anything else is just pure speculation at this point. Secondly, there's been no forecast of impact to local governments and what that will do to us financially. And we do buy a fair amount of material that has carbon involved, like tons of asphalt to do our roadway construction, and we need to understand what that impact is. The bill is being rushed through. Whether you agree with that or not, it is, and it's not really what the short section was sold to the public for when they voted for going to annual sessions. But we can go back and look at the advertising and legislative intent on that if we want to at another time. But I just wanted to get that out there. And in addition, there's already programs in place dealing with this at the state level, whether it's the Clean Fuels program or the green energy portfolio set-asides that we're going to require 50% green energy by 2040, or it's our land use system that ask us to reduce our vehicle miles traveled, work on walkable neighborhoods, and increase active transportation. There are already programs that are dealing with this to some degree at the state level. So why this rises to the level of a bill that has to be put in the short session with an emergency clause on it, I am not sure. So I will be voting in favor of the motion. Any other discussion of the motion? Commissioner Farr.
Just real briefly, and this is not regarding the motion, it's regarding the nature of our discourse. Each word that we say is recorded. Each word that we can say can be requoted. And I really kind of take exception, or absolutely take exception, to Commissioner Sorensen stating that if this bill had come from a different source, we'd be pushing it through. That's not the exact quote, but that's the intention of his statement. I don't appreciate that kind of statement. You know, it really is mischaracterizing the nature of the work that we do as a county commission.
Thank you. Any further discussion of the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Motion passes 4-1 with Commissioner Sorensen in opposition. And that was your motion and Sid's second?
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
All right. So I just want to make sure I had that straight.
Okay,
So,
I'd like to move on to the
principles.
legislative principles document, which is just my other very quick piece, if I could, Mr. Chair.
Move quickly.
So, attachment B is the document that guides my work and staff's work in the absence of a legislative committee. The committee made a couple recommendations to change the document minorly to address the 2018 legislative principles. We did add some language about mitigating exposure to future PERS liabilities. We added, took away some language about the 2017 legislature, and added some language that we really needed this year as we went on the United Front trip under Health and Human Services, support funding for community health center operation, development, and real property acquisition and improvements. So those were just a couple of minor things. We didn't have anything about medicinal and recreational marijuana growing and processing and the workload that's added. So we added those kinds of principles to the document as well, and I just wanted to bring that to the board's attention. And if you could entertain a motion to support this, this would really help me during the session.
Commissioner Lykin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to move approval of attachment B, which is the Lane County Legislative Principles and Priorities.
Second. Then moved by Commissioner Lykin, seconded by Commissioner Williams. Discussion to the motion. Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Alex. And
thank you.
Thank you for your patience on the 10:30, folks. We're only a minute late.
I thought the time had passed. I thought we were moving on beyond the 10:30.
I think some people might have caught airplanes to get here, so they would be a little upset. So with that, we're going to move on to Order 1802-0608 in the matter of authorizing the county administrator to sign agreements with the City of Springfield and the United States Bakery doing business as Franz Family Bakeries to approve a 3-year enterprise zone property tax exemption and to extend the enterprise zone property tax exemption an additional 2 years for a total of 5 years for an investment at its manufacturing facility in Springfield, Oregon. And we have Sarah Means, our Community and Economic Development Manager. So go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Bozovich, members of the board. Thank you for hearing our item today. I'd like to introduce to you who we have as guests. First off, Ron Ostrom. He is our local mill manager at the Franz Bakery in the Glenwood area. Then we have Tom Dubell, who is a company representative out of Altus Group, and of course Courtney Griesel, my counterpart over at the City of Springfield. So I'm going to give you a brief overview related to what the request is before you today, and then I want to make sure we have some opportunity for Ron and Tom to address you as well. And of course, if there are any questions, we'll be happy to answer those as they come up. So as you mentioned, this is an application for an enterprise zone in the Springfield Community Enterprise Zone. As you are all very familiar, there is a 3-year property tax exemption that the company does qualify for. And so what we really are considering here today is that additional 2 years that the company has requested as a part of this project. So just a high-level overview. I don't want to spend too much time on the details, as Ron will also give you some of the details about the project. But in total, this is a $20 million investment into the facility. This was a competitive opportunity for them. They chose to bring it here to Springfield, and so I want to acknowledge that and recognize that in the conversation here today. So a $20 million investment coming to the Glenwood facility, $10 million in property, $10 million in equipment and installation. The other significant factor here is that it's going to create 45 new full-time jobs. So the existing employment on the site is around 214 FTE. They're going to add 45 to that number. And I think it's also important to note that they only had to add about 14 jobs as per the requirements of the enterprise zone. So they're adding an additional 30 beyond the minimum requirements requested as part of the application. So as I mentioned, that the investment is eligible for the 3-year exemption. It's the 2-year exemption that we really want to focus on here. As you are all aware, with the 2-year exemption comes some additional criteria and an agreement that we generally work on as a part of that process. So that is certainly the case here today. And as Chair Bozovich mentioned, part of the request is to delegate authority to the county administrator to enter into an agreement. The agreements have been discussed, and I do have some draft talking points that were included in your packet. The first is that the firm agrees to pay 150% of the average annual wage. At this time, the average annual wage here in Lane County is $41,523. So pay and benefits for these new employees will be roughly $62,285 annually. The firm does agree to sign a first source hiring agreement with the Oregon Employment Division, and they do have to maintain a minimum level of employment, 228 FTE, throughout the 5-year period of time. And then there is also an option for the firm to provide a payback of some sort to the taxing districts, and that has been negotiated, and there is a suggested total of $100,000 over the 5-year term of the exemption period. Again, I want to reiterate that Friends did not have to do their expansion here in this particular facility, and so this was a competitive process, and I think it speaks to the company's desire to invest and be in this community, and we certainly want to thank them for that. A couple of things. There have been some updated numbers I want to make sure to bring to your attention. As you are aware, the enterprise zone is a tax exemption on new investment. The investment that is currently on the tax rolls in this facility will remain on the tax rolls. So we are talking about an exemption on new investment. The property is currently valued with building equipment and the property at $34 million as of the most recent fiscal year 17 tax roll. And Fran's Bakery paid $472,000 in property taxes. So those are a bit updated from your packet. Let's see. The estimated 2-year extension, the abatement is valued at $410,000, but when the properties do come back on the tax rolls in 2 years, it's estimated to bring an additional $200,000 in taxes for the taxing districts. And if there are any more specific questions about the numbers, Courtney is here to help us make sure that we're getting the correct figures. So with that, I'm going to stop and allow Ron, unless there are any questions from the board, allow Ron to give you a few moments of his time, and we can certainly entertain questions after that.
Great. Good morning. Thank you guys for your time this morning. As previously mentioned, my name's Ron Ostrom. I'm the general manager at our Springfield Fran's Bakery. We've been doing business here locally for over 100 years. We currently employ 214 full-time employees at our Springfield plant with an annual benefit and wage package of over $13 million annually. We're very proud of our employees. We're proud of the products that we produce here locally. We sell them throughout our entire organization and nationally. In an effort to stay relevant in a very highly competitive industry, we're looking at a capital investment of $20 million into our Franz Bakery, Springfield. I feel very fortunate that my bakery, our area, was chosen for this expansion. This will be adding 43,000 square feet to our existing facility and a minimum of 45 new full-time employees. So basically our request is that, the county support us in a 2-year expansion to our enterprise zone agreement for this expansion.
And I just want to add, I neglected to make this point, and I think it's an important one. These improvements and the hiring of these employees will happen this calendar year. By August 2018. And so I think that's an important point to not lose in this conversation, that this is an immediate investment, and we're very excited about the opportunities that it's going to provide. So with that, are there any questions of staff or company reps here today?
Commissioner Lycan.
I have no questions. So, but instead, this is a really cool day. I mean, for me personally, as the mayor at the time when Franz Bakery actually sited back then. But it was also a neat partnership agreement that happened because, as we know, the bakery used to be where some sort of arena is today, the Matthew Knight Arena, and I just want to point out, this is one of those times where you do have to give thanks to folks, and I remember Jack Roberts was really, really helpful during this entire process at the Lane Metro Partnership, and we were very fortunate that they guided him to the Glenwood site. So I'm just very pleased to see this, and also just the overall commitment. And we would joke and talk about, well, are they going to be there for the long run? And you just mentioned it. Well, 100 years is not bad for to have bakeries seem to stay in a location for a long period of time, and but it's been a great addition, not only to Glenwood, but of course Franz Bakery's been really here locally has been a very good corporate partner. We're very appreciative of that. We do notice and want to say thank you very much on that. And so when it gets time, folks are ready to move forward on a motion, I'm more than happy to make the motion, but I'll wait till there's questions or comments that will be made. But thank you again for your investment. And and also the the jobs, because those are very good jobs and the kind of jobs that we like to see here locally. And so thank you for your overall strong commitment to our area. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. Yeah, this is pretty cool for a lot of reasons. Historically, when I first came to Eugene in 1973, the first thing I moved into Bean Complex dormitories. First thing I smelled was bread baking. I'm going to like this place. After a while, the bread baking gets kind of old, by the way, but I realized that Williams Bakery was right there with their blue and white gingham ponytail bag, which we kind of miss, but Friends did a great job of maintaining the quality that Williams always had here in town. And I think I'm getting that pretty accurate. The other thing is that when I first came to America, there was a jingle that I used to hear all the time. It's Friends Bread, the good bread, flavor beyond compare. Right? I know the tune. But the most significant thing I'm going to mention is back in 2005, I was the executive director of Food for Lane County, and I met your warehouse manager. We were at a training session together, and we talked about you guys sometimes had bread that was left over, day-old bread that I'm not sure exactly what you were doing with it, but what you do with it now is you give it to Food for Lane County in huge volumes. Sometimes, but sometimes you go into the back of the Food for Lane County warehouse and you see this huge pile of bread, and when I say this is really cool, what I think about are the people who come in who have a pretty strict allocation as to how much of the non-perishable products they can take, and even how much of the more perishable vegetables they can take. Bread, typically, the emergency pantries can take as much as they want. because you guys are so generous with what you give to Food for Lane County. So you're not only providing a great service, a great product to our community, adding jobs to the community, you're also feeding the hungriest among us, the people who are least able to put food on their own table. So thank you from the deep in my heart. Thank you for that.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. Could you go over the wages that these new 45 people, it sounds like you're pretty proud of what they're going to be paid, and so could you talk about that a little bit?
So the wage package, it will vary anywhere between kind of the 18 to 23 and kind of goes up from there as people move up through the ranks. Along with that is our full maintenance of benefit package. So we do not participate in a copay with our employees. Our company pays the entire thing. So there's no
for health care.
For health care, yes. It is very generous, one of the better health care packages that you will find. So we look at that as an entire compensation package, adding up to the $60,000 plus annually.
Good. And then what is the term on your, I mean, assuming you're borrowing this $20 million, I was just going, wow, that's like $1 million a year in interest at 5%. That's a lot of money. How much, what is your, what does it cost you to make an investment of $20 million?
You know, that's actually an answer that I wouldn't have at this time.
You borrow it?
So probably, I would imagine some, but again, I'm not part of the financial team.
Okay. I mean, it's a lot of money, and the amount of the tax, local property tax, is estimated at $400,000 a year for 2 years.
No, the total amount, and Courtney, if you have the annual here, but so the value of the 2-year extension total is 410. So it would be roughly a couple $100,000.
105.
That's an estimated. It's an estimated number. Yeah. So we're cautious to not want to speculate as to how they will actually get to financing the project, because it will probably be a mix based on their portfolio, but. We did take into consideration depreciation of machinery and equipment and appreciation of land. And so it is truly an estimate that the 2-year value is $410,000. In total, over the 5 years, it is just over $1 million, which is helping kind of move the project to competitive. But we want to be cautious that we don't guess as to the company's pro forma for financing the project.
Okay. So you're talking about the amount that is financed or borrowed or invested, but you are fairly clear on the amount of the property tax.
We are. We've been working quite closely with their accountants to understand very specifically depreciation on this type of equipment. Okay. And so it's not a flat depreciation. It really is kind of a process over time.
How long does it last?
The equipment itself?
Yeah,
to make
the bakery items.
Oh, well.
Is it like 10 years? That's what I'm trying to get at. Is it valued at, it's going to last for 10 years? Or is it going to be like a year?
Yeah, depreciation is generally on equipment roughly 10 years.
Right.
The equipment itself lasts much, much longer.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. That's what I wanted to know, was how long would the investment last? Is there a way to answer that question that simply stated?
You can give the example of how old the crouton machine is. It's been in place for how many years?
Yeah. Well, we do have our crouton line that we still use to this day is from the 1950s.
Yeah. Okay.
So hence the reason why bakery equipment is so expensive, because you usually buy it once.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Williams.
Well, thank you for picking our area for your expansion. That's huge. Thank you for a great product or line of products. Grew up on your products. And also, anytime you can add jobs in a community, that's very important. 45 jobs at the caliber that you're offering is incredible. And so thank you on behalf of those folks that are now going to find some employment or moving things around in their lives a little bit to help you with your workforce. So thank you very much.
So I'll everybody said just about everything I would say, and just want to say thank you. And I do kind of miss you guys being a little bit closer, because I used to get to smell that bread cooking now and then, and I come in from the west side, so I really don't go past, Glenwood that often, where I get to smell the bread cooking. I'm a real bread fiend. I just really used to miss that in the mornings going by there, especially when you're doing cinnamon bread. But so with that, I'll look to Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to move approval of order 18-02-06-08 in the matter of authorizing the county administrator to sign agreements with City of Springfield and the United States Bakery doing business as Fran's Family Bakeries to approve a 3-year enterprise zone property tax exemption and to extend the enterprise zone property tax exemption an additional 2 years for a total of 5 years for an investment at its manufacturing facility in Springfield, Oregon.
Second.
So it's been moved by Commissioner Lyken, seconded by Commissioner Farr. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
So, do we want to jump back to county administration announcements? Mr. Mokrzycki?
I can do that, and I know that Becky Taylor is here. I think Steve Dingle is going to come down for the next item, so maybe once Steve gets here, we can start on the next one. I just have a few updates, Mr. Chair. First, board had asked for a recap of the, now I forget the date, the January special election. 23rd special election, the turnout. So here's the final, but not, at least the cost amounts are an estimate. The turnout was 42%. We count the remaining qualified ballots this week prior to certifying the election on Friday. Today is the deadline for challenge and unsigned ballots to be resolved. The cost is estimated, the cost for this special elections in Lane County is estimated to be $250,000. But again, that's not finalized. We're submitting costs tomorrow for what we have so far. The state has asked us to submit our costs by Friday, by late on Friday. They will submit then for reimbursement. Our clerk's office will submit for reimbursement, but does not know exactly how much the state is going to reimburse, about $250,000 there. Okay. Then I had a couple other quick items. We have our Equity and Access Advisory Board meeting tomorrow at 5:30 at Charlton in the second floor conference room. That's a public meeting, open. We do this every month, the first Wednesday of every month at 5:30. Open to the public. There's public comment that we take there. 2 interesting items I just want to bring to the board's attention. We've engaged with the University of Oregon 3 p.m. program to do an analysis of gender equity issues in Lane County, and so we'll be looking at how women fare compared to men in our workforce as it relates to the types of positions, compensation for positions, promotion, and similar issues. So that will be an interesting analysis and study for us to look at. We're really looking forward to that. One of the things that we're really proud of is in the past 3 years, we've increased the number of women in leadership positions in Lane County from 36% to 51%. So as the latest count that I saw, we have over 50% of our leadership in Lane County is women compared to men. And that's, again, about a 15% increase over the past 3 years. The other item that will be brought to the Equity and Access Advisory Board tomorrow evening is a bias report from law enforcement. So our sheriff's office, the Sheriff Trapp, I believe, will be there and presenting a report that we do each year around tracking hate and bias crimes in the county. I was going to give an update on the strategic plan. I think I'll hold that since it's ongoing, and I can update you in a couple weeks. We will be back on February, I think it's February 27th at the next meeting, not next week, after President's Day, to have a work session on the strategic plan, but that work continues and is gaining steam. So there you go. That's everything I have. Unless you have questions, Mr. Chair, we can jump back to the fatal crash investigation team.
Yep. Any questions for Steve? If not, then we'll move on to item 7A, which first is County Council announcements, which I know we do have an executive session today scheduled for 1:30 time certain, so don't forget that, folks, up in the Board of Commissioners conference room. And we will take up the issue that doesn't pertain to the ASME units first. So any other announcements from County Council?
Chair Bozovich, no other announcements.
Then we'll move on to item 7B, which is a report on the fatal crash investigation team. And we have Steve Dingle, County Council, and Becky Taylor, our Senior Transportation Planner.
Chair Bozovich and members of the Board of Commissioners, first of all, I'd like to thank the board for their commitment to reducing fatal collisions in Lane County. We're going to, Becky and I are going to make a presentation today, and really the goal of this is to explain generally what the fatal crash investigation team is, what its goal is. I will say this, it is reflective. I noticed, I heard Steve mention the strategic plan. I think that this team is reflective of one of those values that we have, which is to solve problems. I'm sure you're all aware about the high traffic fatality rate there is in Lane County, and rather than basically, there's problems with rural patrol and other things. Becky came up with this concept, and so we'll explain it, but the overall goal is to try and do something, so to reduce those fatalities, even if it's just by one. So, okay, here it is. So you can see what the FSIT team has people from the Sheriff's Office, Public Health, Road Maintenance, Traffic Engineering, Transportation Planning, Risk Management, and County Council. And you might ask, why is County Council involved? I was early on in the process, I was contacted because there was the obvious concern about going back and reviewing accidents and creating coming to conclusions that could potentially involve liability for the county. And again, rather than just say, no, it's too risky or there's no way to do it, we actually worked through that issue. And that's why I'm involved. All of this is under, with me present, and is protected by various rules of evidence and attorney-client privilege. But we do, this encourages folks to be candid and share everything, because that's the only way we're going to get to the to a good result. So you can see this is what the goal is. Is there one more after this, or is that? Okay, then I think this is Becky.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, Chair Bozovich and Commissioners. Thank you all for adopting our Transportation Safety Action Plan in 2017. And just to remind you of that planning effort, you may recall it was funded by Oregon Department of Transportation, and it was developed in collaboration with Lane Council of Governments, along with many other regional partners interested in reducing fatal collisions in Lane County. This planning process included data analysis that helped us understand the problem and the high-risk factors that contribute to fatal collisions. And our work with stakeholders and review of best practices helped us develop engineering, enforcement, and education actions that would reduce fatal collisions. One of the important aspects of our safety action plan is recognizing fatal collisions as a public health issue. Traffic fatalities are a leading cause of death in Lane County, and in recent years, Lane County had more fatalities from collisions than other counties in Oregon. And like other public health issues, we need to focus on prevention. We learned that most fatal collisions are preventable. The leading contributing factor in fatal collisions was excessive speed, and the leading crash type was roadway departures. So we know we can save the most lives if we can slow people down and keep them from leaving the roadway. This solution requires enforcement, engineering, and education to bring about behavior change and to account for human error. Our fatal crash investigation team was created shortly after the adoption of our safety action plan in 2017 to align the county departments in moving toward zero deaths on Lane County's transportation system. And Steve shared with you the team's structure, mission, and protocol. But bringing together staff with expertise in roadway engineering, planning, and maintenance, along with enforcement, risk management, public health, and education on a monthly basis has also necessitated creating tools that will benefit all of us working on improving safety. For example, we are making improvements to our crash data and our ability to show that data visually through GIS. I don't have an example for you today, but I will at our next update. And this, again, helps us to see where we need to focus our attention. The team has met 4 times, and in addition to reviewing specific fatal crashes, it's been an opportunity to develop the team members and share information about safety issues and efforts, not only within Lane County, but across the state and nation. Through Lane County's safety work, both with our safety action plan and the formation of this fatal crash investigation team, we've elevated our status in the eyes of safety stakeholders. Specifically, our work has gotten ODOT's attention and their willingness to invest in our efforts. ODOT has committed to funding new positions. You know about the regional safety coordinator position at LCOG, which is in the process of being filled. More recent developments include ODOT's commitment to funding a new Dewey investigator with our DA and a driver ed coordinator at Lane Education Service District. And we'll continue to update you on these efforts as they evolve. This is my last slide. I want to again, thank you for your support and your direction in saving lives and reducing suffering in Lane County. We look forward to regular updates with the board on safety efforts, with quarterly presentations on the work of the fatal crash investigation team. So I'll open it up for any questions you may have.
Questions from the board? Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I don't really have specific questions, but Becky, thank you for the information. And Steve, thank you, because it actually really makes sense to have legal counsel as part of this. So I appreciate that very much. Not a specific question, other than the fact that I really support this, because in the past, if you think about fatal investigations, really involved public safety and very little else. And even though I still believe public safety primarily is where the investigations should probably come from, but I think what we've heard is that doing an investigation and having transportation involved here, and having other areas of Lane County involved, you can then come back and say, you know what, there could be a correction here that doesn't necessarily cost millions of dollars, but maybe it's an addition of a guardrail, or maybe it's a little piece of engineering done on the road itself, that instead of millions of dollars, it's a couple $100,000. And so this is the piece I really appreciate greatly, and I really thank you for the fact that we do have this entire investigative team in place, and I'm glad the board's been supportive. Because right now, without rural patrol, we have to be creative and innovative on this and get out of being first place in traffic fatalities. My understanding is the 16 numbers have just come out. I haven't seen them yet, and I don't know when they'll be released. But I saw something that where the 2016, because we're still on 2015 numbers when it comes to fatalities. But it's one of the reasons why I think we're working like we are, especially with our federal partners, getting some sort of replacement in place for those federal monies that we lost that go right to our road funds that can be used for rural patrol. And without that, I think this more creative, innovative approach is going to be helpful. And I appreciate the work that's being done and on this. And Becky, thank you for your update. And looking forward to updates in the future. I mean, really, I think it's going to be key. So when information's coming forward, decisions can be made. And I think in a effective way. So appreciate the work. Thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Taylor, thank you for the presentation. This is great. And I just want to point out that Commissioner Bozievich, most of the Highway 126 West falls directly in his district, so he hears a lot more about the issues on 126, which is the state's deadliest highway. That's the correct, I believe, is that right? State's deadliest highway?
Pretty close.
Yeah. But the comprehensive approach that you have, county roads aren't only outside the urban growth boundary. We have county roads inside the urban growth boundary. And just this morning, Ms. Taylor, I wanted to thank you for responding so quickly to an accident on Howard Avenue where a young cyclist was hit by a car in or near a pedestrian crossing. And they pointed out to the fact that high-speed lane departures aren't the only cause of fatalities. Low-speed bicycle car interaction can be the same. And if we look at our roads like inside the urban growth boundary, such as Howard, which is in front of a middle school and an elementary school, it's a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit other than 20 during school hours. People don't adhere to that. And the fact that we have fatalities on rural roads is an issue. But we have far greater density of traffic inside the urban growth boundary, and the fact that you're paying attention to that and your responsiveness, the message came to me at I think a little bit before 8 this morning, and by 9 o'clock you had responded. So I wanted to really point out my appreciation for the department's quick response to what potentially is a major issue. And looking inside the urban growth boundary, the urban transition where we do have county roads that are very dangerous roads, some in front of schools, in front of Irving Elementary, for instance, in front of Howard and Howard Elementary and Corridor Middle School. The fact that we are paying attention to the safety of the roads means a great deal to the people. As we go through the River Road Santa Clara, it's called a what's the name of the plan? It's a refinement plan. Thank you. So thank you very much for that. And really, I wanted to take this very timely moment to point out that you responded, man, within seconds, it seemed like, this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. I know that the phrase, we don't have a traffic safety team, or we don't have the money for traffic safety in terms of law enforcement. Is there something we can do now so that we don't have to say that in a year? Or, in other words, is that even part of your work group? In other words, I feel like we just keep saying that, and here we have this horrible situation of maybe we're number one, maybe we're number two. We'll know soon, I guess. We were number one in deaths. And at one point, I think it was a year ago or so, I said, between Eugene and Springfield and Lane County, we're leading the state. And I got an email back from the city saying, remember, we didn't have any traffic deaths in Eugene, none. And yet the state reports that Lane County had the worst. Well, I mean, if a third of our population's in Eugene, that's a big number, but maybe it's not quite accurate, but it's a big number, and that means imagine what the rate is outside of the city of Eugene if Lane County as a whole has the highest death rate. So my point is, it seems like instead of acknowledging that we don't have traffic enforcement outside of the two largest cities in the county, and that's the way it's going to be. I would prefer to say, wow, we have one of the worst traffic deaths in the state of Oregon, not just per capita, but counties that are much bigger than ours have lower death rates than we do. And if it's also true that the death rate in Eugene, which has got a third of our miles, or probably half of our miles, and a third of our population, it contributes very little to the overall death rate in Lane County. So that means it's really bad. It's even worse than we've been told. So I feel like we need to move beyond, we've got a problem and there's no way to solve it, to we have a problem and we're going to figure out how to get the revenue for it. Now, in days gone by, we've talked about having the revenue for purposes of of this through fines. Well, that was bad during the recession, the last couple that I recall. I've been told, I think was Commissioner Stewart mentioned this maybe a year or two ago, that, well, the changes in the state allocation of where the money goes from fines also contributed to the decline of our funding of the traffic team. So is it within your authority to work on this for ideas, or is it outside of your authority, and are you working on it?
If I can, Chair Bozovich, Commissioner Sorensen, I'll just start on that. I think that the recognition by this group was clearly everyone agrees, the sheriff agrees, and I think everyone on the team agrees that there needs to be additional enforcement in rural unincorporated Lane County. And we are actually, we've discussed within our group ways that we can do that are kind of creative, using static old patrol cars and some other things to try and slow people down. I really think that the goal of this group is, again, rather than just say we don't have adequate rural enforcement, so therefore there's nothing we can do. That wasn't, we just took the exact opposite approach, which is recognizing that there is this limited rural enforcement. Given that reality, what can we do? And as you said, and as Becky mentioned, there's a lot of things that we can do that aren't terribly, rumble strips, other things. But to your question, yeah, it really is a decision for the board. I know I just talked to the sheriff yesterday. He would love nothing more than to have more substantial rural patrols. He recognizes that. I mean, the numbers were pretty staggering. I wouldn't want to quote me on this, but I think he said that the last year that the traffic team was in existence, they issued, I want to say, more than 20,000 citations, and his entire agency issued about 3,200 last year. So that gives you a good idea about the huge difference in enforcement that's going on. So I'll turn it over to Becky, see if she has anything else to say about that.
I'm glad that you all recognize the issue and the magnitude of our safety problem. And again, we are trying to use our existing toolkit because there's some low-hanging fruit with the rumble strips. Where a couple of the fatal crashes involved drunk driving, and so we've been talking to Lane County Public Health about a proactive campaign and reaching out to drinking establishments. I'll have more about that campaign at a future update. But yeah, we have real limitations in our resources, but at the same time, we're identifying some long-range needs. For example, something that, as a region, we're wanting to investigate what there may be in the way of automated enforcement opportunities that requires some legislative changes, but there is some interest in the region to at least investigate what that would take and what that would mean for Lane County. So it's an entire spectrum of low-hanging fruit and then long-range plans that we don't have the immediate resources, but know that we need to address that in the future, are things that we're all thinking about.
Thank you. Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of the things that I have noticed here in the last few years are, as was referred to by Mr. Dingle, rumble strips. Several weeks ago, I had an opportunity to go out 126 and about in the no-tie area just before that. A vehicle passed me, and I didn't realize how much noise those rumble strips make. So they will let you know when you are leaving your lane. One of the other things that I've noticed on some highways is the fog line. Also, when you go over the fog line, it makes sort of a humming harmonic noise. I think that's a great thing. You have two distinct different noises, one telling you, correct to the left and the other correct to the right. So I think those are of huge significance. First saw those maybe a dozen or more years ago with ODOT or the federal highway, the Interstate 5 had those along the edge. It's what first caught my attention, but I believe those two audible opportunities for a driver to be aware that I'm drifting, it's just huge. Another thing that I've noticed has been very beneficial, because I was getting comments and I passed them on, areas like Coburg that were experiencing, they have 2 or 3 roads that head clear to the Lynn County line, and they're fairly open and flat, and so people tend to move out pretty quickly in there. So the mobile signs that register a person's speed, those are effective. I had several people concerned and called me, and we installed, the county installed those portable signs, and the feedback was very good from what I got. And one last thing in that vein, have we looked at the mega insurance companies, State Farm, Farmers, all of those nationwide, all of those really big folks, do they have grant opportunities to where the smaller communities, rural communities, could take advantage of a grant if such things exist? And if not, maybe a prompt that that would be a good thing for them to be involved in. And so just a couple of thoughts, but thank you for the work that you do in the report. And the road improvements that have been made are saving lives already. I'm convinced of that. And as we implement those more and more on our other highways and byways, so much the better for public safety. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And if I could, Chair Bozovich and Commissioner Williams, this group is very good at thinking outside the box. Just one example, one of the big issues in the rural areas is that people who have been out at establishments don't have access like they do in the city to a taxi cab or even Uber. And our group was talking about how can we push out to those communities and get those other options for people, whether it's vouchers or whether it's, we try and get some rural Uber service going on weekends or whatever it is. But that's just one example of identifying what the problem is. And instead of saying, well, we can't do anything about it, well, what can we do? And then, as Becky mentioned, you also do the education and the reaching out to the establishments. So that's a good example of looking at what our existing resources are and trying to find some sort of solution to it by providing some form of rural transportation on the weekends.
Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm sure Chair Bozovich will be very quiet when it comes to issues like Uber and Lyft. Anyway, so to a point that Commissioner Williams brought up, so the administration released what they call their concepts and their framework on a potential infrastructure package. And I got a good copy of it. And the nice thing is, so when I'm participating in the National Association of Counties, I get great backup by Becky and David Reeser. So it's always nice that our staff is so well informed, and not only that, but they do such a good job on as far as providing information. Looks like there's going to be a big push on rural highways throughout America. And I think part of it is there was a feeling of neglect over the last, you can't say 8 years, you can probably say the last really 10 to 15 years. And so there seems to be a real push on this. Of course, there's no pay for or anything else out there, and they're quite not, I don't think they've gotten that close yet, but it sounds like to me that at least the administration's Department of Transportation, so Secretary Chow and her staff have a package to be prepared sometime in March. We may see it at the NACO conference, what that's entailed. In fact, she has been added as a speaker. And so there's a good chance we may get to actually see what they may look like, and maybe some options on what the pay-fors will be. Of course, My personal opinion is Congressman DeFazio is probably as well read and has some of the best understanding of transportation infrastructure than anybody back in D.C. And be curious to get his thoughts as well. I believe Congressman Walden, just because of his position, is going to be playing a key role in this. And so, well, I think we'll get to hear more. But I just wanted to point out that what they have provided is kind of a framework, is really coming back and saying, you know, our rural highways have been neglected, and it's time we get those back to where they need to be. So there is opportunity. What that may or may not look like, there's going to be a big push on opportunity on what the funding mechanisms can be, and see if we can bring those dollars back here. And without always having to feel like it's always about force management. And even though that's part of it, because that's, you know, that goes into our road fund, you know, U.S. Forest Service money, but also just to see what the framework would look like. So I'm looking forward to what Secretary Chow has to say and what that means for counties. But the fact that she's agreed to speak at the NACO conference, that's a great message in my opinion. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
So I just want to say thank you for the report. And the one thing that really impresses me about this is just the integration of the team throughout the organization and the multidisciplinary participation in this investigation team, and particularly public health. You know, people, and it really, you know, allows folks to focus on this is a public health issue. And those are the folks also responsible for a lot of our prevention and education programs. So having them understand, you know, what the causes were and what are drivers behind fatalities in this county helps tie them to, you know, better programs and better education systems and getting at those drivers of those causes. It's you know, something I sitting on that Highway 126 Safety Task Force and looked into the fatal and serious injury crash data. You know, you've said it already. It's mostly lane departure issues or impaired driving that are, you know, and impaired/distracted driving. I'll put those two together because they basically cause the same issue. Are a lot of the causes we're seeing, which, you know, are driving, you know, faster than conditions. And it's not necessarily speeding. You know, a lot of the crashes that are on, you know, Badger Mountain on Highway 126 is about just going too fast for the fact that it's wet and slick. And the folks might have been doing the speed limit but lost traction and left the roadway, and then there was a serious accident. So it's not always just about the speed limit, it's about for conditions. You know, so that's another piece of education that we need to kind of get out there. You can, you know, the posted speed limit does not always mean that that's the safe speed. It's the max speed. So, and I really appreciate the integration of the team, the fact that it is under county council, so you guys can, you know, work freely without concern of liability for the county and get to the root causes of these issues. It's interesting. Commissioner Sorensen brought up the whole issue of rural patrol and how much that ties into this, and a little bit about why we don't have a traffic team. It actually traces back to two bills in the 2011 regular legislation session, which is House Bill 2710 and House Bill 2712, which were the bills that were the sweep and reallocation of court fines and fees, and basically the preemption of local court fines and fees. And that's really, those two bills basically made it almost impossible to run a traffic team on the fees alone without general fund support. In addition to the whole political issue of running a traffic team and telling somebody that you weren't going to investigate their home burglary, but you were going to write him a ticket if he went, you know, if he got, you know, was rushing home because his wife called him because the house got broken into. So that's a whole other issue. But as part of that, you know, I mentioned this when we had our first strategic planning session, and I'll mention it again, and something we need to be wrapping into this is rural patrol keeps coming up as a strategic planning item, and we need a permanent source of funding for that, one of those options is going to be looking at special districts. And in order to do that, it's going to require amendment of the Eugene Springfield Metro Plan. So that is something we need to be keeping in mind and maybe taking a look at and understanding that process, and maybe talking with our fellow city councilors in both jurisdictions about the needs for it and the drivers behind it, and how this relates to this whole public health issue. So just want to remind folks of that. I want to touch on one thing that wasn't really touched on, because Orrin Schumacher's on this committee. So, and he's the person that's in charge of our maintenance of our roads. And one of the reasons that's important, and one of the reasons why the recent transportation bill is important, is sometimes a crash can actually be caused by the lack of maintenance or a maintenance issue. And where we can, determine that and fix that. But one of the places people don't connect with traffic safety is vegetation management. And that's under Orrin's department and all that. And one of the things the new transportation bill with the additional funds is allowing us is to beef up our vegetation management from the anemic levels it was at, where we actually are starting to see visual impairment along the roadways, because we're only getting one pass of mowing done a year, not to mention the whole issue of fire safety that comes with that. But the other issue there is allowing woody vegetation to take root and grow. One of the things you look at when you're looking at protecting people on lane departure is what's that safety runoff, and how long do they have to correct before they hit that immovable object that's going to actually cause the fatal accident. And if we're allowing the honey locust to sprout and get stiff enough to actually stop a car and cause an accident because we're not maintaining our vegetation along our roadways, that is a traffic safety item too. So really understanding that there's this connection all across our county apparatus, from our public health department right down to the guys that are mowing the right-of-ways, about keeping people safe on our roadways. It's pretty important. So I have one question out of all this. Are you only looking at fatals? Because the team says fatal crash investigation team, but is there any desire to look at, maybe on a quarterly basis or semi-annual or annual basis, serious injury data and other crash data to look for hot spots and other places that we may want to look at as a team?
The team is interested in also looking at severe injury collisions and just all collisions for hot spots. We do have a number of fatalities to investigate, so I think we've got our work cut out for us for a while, but we are looking at every fatal crash relative to all crashes in that area for patterns, for example, so that we do have kind of a holistic solution and not specific to that crash, but things that are happening along that corridor is one example of how we're looking at more than just one fatal collision. But our charge and our focus most immediately is on looking at a fatal collision.
But we do, just this last meeting, we did put up we did have a slide that listed the most dangerous roads in Lane County, and included on that was not just fatalities, but serious injuries. So yes, I mean, so not directly investigating those, but they certainly go into the equation when we evaluate where to put the resources and which roads need to be prioritized.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Having had friends and family that have experienced serious injuries in vehicle accidents, it's as impactful to families and folks. Not quite as bad as a fatality, but it can seriously change somebody's life. So I appreciate that you're looking at that. And, but for a little bit of chance, sometimes a serious injury crash could have been a fatality. So looking at those, I appreciate that you are taking that into account as you look at all the data. So any other further questions for either Mr. Dingell or Ms. Taylor? And I have to appreciate that not only did Commissioner Williams and Commissioner Farr, Mr. Mokrzycki get the green notification day, so did Ms. Taylor.
And we missed it.
Who got the yellow O, though?
Well, if no further questions, thank you for the report. Really appreciate the work you all are doing to try and keep folks safe here in Lane County.
Thank you.
So with that, we are down to commissioners' business and announcements. Any announcements from the commissioners? Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on Saturday, I was able to participate in the grand opening of the Thurston Hills Natural Area. And as you know, we had the joint meeting with the city of Springfield talking about that and voted to approve that. And it was really fantastic. I mean, Congressman DeFazio was there. We had a person speaking from the Bonneville Power Administration that was there. Of course, Mayor Lumberg, Willamette Lane, that was obviously represented and spoke about it, and really what it all means for the community. And it's also right down below where the trails begin at the parking lot is, I believe I'm correct on this, is the oldest standing homestead in the city of Springfield called the Gray House. And it is, I believe, was built in about late 1850s, I think. And there it is, and it's continued to be restored. Looks fantastic, and so it's right there. But it was just a great day, and Lane County was called out for their partnership, which we were thrilled to see, and it was just great to see the culmination. Really, this whole thing, the vision started back when I was mayor. I think in my first term is when we began discussing this, but we actually envisioned it to be, large-scale homes on the hillside, and of course the recession came. But it was just that great collaboration and partnership that goes on in Springfield, and there's where Willamette Lane took control. We had the vote of the public, which I believe, if I remember right, the vote was at least 75% approval in moving forward on that. So it was a great day, and I just wanted to share that and also point out that Lane County was called out, and which was really appreciative of that. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome. Further announcements from the board? Commissioner Farr.
Just very briefly, I mentioned briefly, I believe last week, that I'd spent 2 afternoons and mornings at Willamette High School with the students who are involved in writing laws that would pass along to either counties, cities, or to the state to make life better from their students' viewpoint. It's a pretty deliberative process. They've been doing it for some time at Willamette High School, and they've been coming up with action plans that really do kind of address some pretty important issues. In the past, they've had action plans like requiring an app on your phone that makes it so you can't use it while you're driving, for instance. And I know that we're moving forward with such legislation. But significantly, this last time I was there, no less than 6 different groups were proposing laws surrounding homelessness, surrounding finding ways to account for homelessness in our community. And a number of the students are going to be visiting here at the county to either do a little bit of intern-type, research-type work, but it's going to be exciting for them because much of the things that they took the initiative without really taking a look at what the Poverty and Homelessness Board was doing, how much of the things that they're thinking about mirror the exact work of the Poverty and Homelessness Board. So I was pretty impressed by that. I have photographs of it, and you'll all maybe have a chance to meet some of the students when they come down to visit. And then last Thursday, St. Vincent de Paul opened its youth house. They've been working on that for quite some time. It will be a temporary, semi-permanent in some cases, housing for up to 13 unaccompanied female youth who are high school students. It's the start of a process for St. Vincent de Paul, where they'll be adding other facilities as we move down the road for unaccompanied youth, which is a gap in the services that we provide. I know a number of us have been working on, for instance, 15th Night, and for instance, working with Nedco and Hosea and some others in providing services for youth. But it's moving forward at hugely well-attended event. I think about 300 people were there at the opening of the youth house. And so St. Vincent de Paul, once again, is moving forward with that. And then, Mr. Chair, if I may, we will be in executive session this afternoon. Will you be reading us into executive session prior to our adjournment for the noon break or subsequent?
Yes, I will be.
Okay, then I will have an announcement to make at that time. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So, any other announcements? So I just want to briefly mention that the Lane Regional Air Protection Agency is holding a public hearing on Thursday. I believe it's about 12:15, but I don't have the exact time in front of me. But the public hearing is going to be on open burning regulations for the Eugene UGB area. So those of you that live in the unincorporated areas of River Road, Santa Clara, or out in the industrial corridor, or maybe around in the fringes on the South Hills even, because there are parcels in the South Hills that apply. We'll be looking at regulations that will increase the minimum lot size where you'll be allowed to do open burning of yard debris. So if you are interested in that, you may want to pay attention to that LRAPA board meeting, which is at their headquarters building there at 10th and Main in Springfield. And in addition to that, I will be up at the hearing tomorrow for the cap and invest legislation. And then, of course, we'll all probably, some of us all be in Salem on Monday for AOC Day. So going to be spending some significant time up in Salem in the next few days. With that, I want to move us to a review of assignments before we get to exec session, because I've got to look at the language. Do you have review?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was just waiting for you to ask me. So I just have the one clarification on the work session for March 14th that we'll have two items there, one on the initiative process and then a second item on the board referral process.
Great. Any additions to the assignments or changes? All right, with that, I'm getting ready to read us into executive session, and I will call on former Chair Farr, Commissioner Farr, to, I think you need to
Thank you,
make
Mr.
a public
Chair.
statement.
Yeah, we have two items on this, the executive committee, excuse me, the what is it called? Thank you. We had an executive committee meeting yesterday. Executive session. One is regarding employment. The second is regarding an AFSCME discussion. The first one I will be able to attend. The second, regarding AFSCME, I will be recusing because my son does work for LCBH as a mental health specialist.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I thought the first item is on the performance auditor.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't state specifically the performance auditor, but yes. So the one that HR will be there for. Actually, they'll probably be there for both, I would guess, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, but the second one I will not be in attendance. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to read us into executive session, and that executive session is going to begin at 1:30 up in the Board of Commissioners conference room. But we will not be coming out in the public session afterwards. So just so Metro TV knows. And we'll probably adjourn from there. And then our next meeting will be next week at our regular time. So the Board of Commissioners will meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations and to consider the employment of a Sorry, the language didn't include the employment, but I know we're also doing employment under this. The executive session will be held pursuant to ORS 1926602D, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience shall be asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during executive session except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decisions will be made in executive session, and we will not be coming back out in a public session after that. So with that, I am going to recess the Board of Commissioners meeting, and we will reconvene in executive session at 1:30.